Here's what's coming up on The World Today. Gazans reject expected Israel ground invasion, saying they will fight them. EU leaders meet to discuss more support for Ukraine. At least 27 killed by disastrous Hurricane Otis in Acapulco, Mexico. Damage is seen in billions. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. The UN General Assembly will be voting today for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The draft resolution calls for unrestricted humanitarian aid and compliance with international humanitarian law. Jordan has tabled the draft resolution to be voted on at the Emergency Special Session, ESS, on behalf of the Arab group to demand an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza and the delivery of humanitarian aid. Earlier on, Gazans lined up outside a United Nations Development Programme water station, eager to fill up canisters and bottles with fresh water. Supplies of food, water, medicines and fuel have been running low. While there have been some limited deliveries of food, water and medicine since Saturday, no fuel has been allowed in. Israel is concerned about the possible diversion of fuel deliveries by Hamas. Israel's conditions for inspecting and tracking the aid, security risks, transporting and distributing it, and arrangement of its passage through a crossing not used during previous conflicts for large-scale relief efforts have all hampered work to get the operation off the ground. The UN agency providing aid to Palestinian civilians in Gaza is warning that it may have to shut down operations shortly if no fuel reaches the enclave amid an increasingly desperate need of basic amenities. The United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees says it needs fuel urgently to maintain life-saving humanitarian operations in the Islamist Hamas-ruled enclave that has been under Israeli bombardment for almost 3 weeks. In the meantime, UN World Food Programme Executive Director Cindy McCain is criticizing the strict checks on aid trucks at the Rafa crossing from Egypt into Gaza. Ms. McCain calls it an insane bureaucracy, saying the rigorous procedures slows down the flow of aid, which prior to the conflict escalation used to see approximately 400 trucks cross each day.
The situation on the ground is catastrophic in Gaza. And it's catastrophic because there's no food, there's no water, there's no fuel. Everyone's heard what's going on in that respect. But in the case of food, we haven't been able to get our trucks in. We've gotten a dribble of trucks in. We need to get a large amount in. We need safe, unfettered access into Gaza so that we can feed and make sure that people don't starve to death, because that's what's happening. Look, I don't care who gets the credit. We just need to get our trucks in because that's what this is about. It's not about who gets the credit in my mind. It's about getting the food in. We have a large amount of trucks waiting at the gate that are loaded with food. I know the question has been, well, how will it wind up in the hands of Hamas? We've been in Gaza for years, WFP has, and we have people on the ground. That's all they do, is make sure that the food goes to where it's supposed to go. So I can tell you we have the systems in place, we have certainly our people in place, we have other methods to make sure that our cash-based transfers indeed go to exactly who they're supposed to go to. But it's a war zone. Things are going to happen. And so I can't say 100% that nothing's going to wind up in the hands of the bad guys.
Another 8 trucks carrying food, medicine and water are expected to cross into the Gaza Strip today, but a combination of technical, political and security issues are hindering the deliveries. Lynn Hastings, the UN humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, says detailed negotiations are taking place with Israel in a bid to secure more humanitarian crossings in the densely populated enclave, which has been hit by unrelenting airstrikes, killing thousands in response to surprise attacks by Hamas gunmen October the 7th. Richard Pieperkorn, WHO representative for the occupied Palestinian territory, said the agency had received estimates that some 1,000 unidentified bodies are still buried under the rubble in Gaza, which are not yet included in death tolls. Gaza health authorities say that more than 7,000 people have been killed by Israeli bombardments in response to Hamas attacks.
We have seen some deliveries of trucks starting. They started on the 21st of October. We have gotten in approximately 74 trucks. We're expecting another 8 or so. Just to put things in comparison, there were 450 trucks going into Gaza before October 7th. And that was under some very, very strict restrictions in terms of goods being able to get into Gaza. We are down now to approximately 12. So from 450 down to 12. And at the same time, of course, very little access to any type of drinking water or electricity, which means we need to be bringing in fuel and water, which we weren't having to do before. The screening and the requirements in terms of the packing, President Biden had to call Prime Minister Netanyahu on the second day that goods were supposed to go in. So that would have been the 22nd or the 23rd or something like that. Because in addition to the technical issues and the security issues, there's political issues as well. And there's a certain amount of pressure on the government of Israel in terms of its domestic politics.
The needs are much higher than what's going in. And this is the reality on the ground. 2%, this is what I was referring to. 2%, the 9 trucks that WFP entered represent 2% of what is needed actually, or what was going into Gaza prior to the crisis. If you want to meet the demands at the moment and the humanitarian needs on the ground, we need around 40 trucks a day of food to be able to reach 1 million people. If you want to reach the whole population in Gaza, we need 100 trucks of food alone every day.
Let's talk more about the situation there. Joining us now, David Otto, Defense and Security Specialist. He joins us from our Abuja studio. Hi, David. It's good to see you. What are your thoughts on the conflict that is about 3 weeks old with no end, it appears, in sight?
Well, Millicent, as we know, as you rightly said, the incursion by Hamas into Israel territory on the 7th of October was highly condemnable. This was a devastating attack on civilians, who were going about their daily lives. But the revenge and the amount of devastation that one has witnessed, by the Israelis against the territory, which is occupied, known as Gaza, has been overwhelming. And we have seen and witnessed an unprecedented nature of humanitarian crisis. Civilians being killed, children and women, in the name of revenge. But of course, this is something which, has the risk, Millicent, of spreading further, perhaps dragging countries in, like Egypt, of course, Hezbollah as well from the Lebanese side. Syria has been involved. The United States is involved, Iran, possibly, accused of aiding and abetting Hamas. So it's a very, devastating, war between Israel and Gaza, and by extension, Israel and Hamas. This is, something that, is very difficult at this point in time, Millicent, to determine how this is going to end. The Israelis have promised that they will invade. We have seen some kind of what I call mini invasions, but 3 weeks on, there is this promise that the Israelis defense forces want to annihilate Hamas. And it's just devastating. And we're looking forward to a point, at which the United Nations and its parties, could come to some kind of a conclusion, to reach a settlement to this long-standing crisis.
The United Nations is trying, to sort of get a resolution to bring in ceasefire that would allow ceasefire pause that would allow much needed aid into Gaza. Countless resolutions do exist, but do you see an end to this? The EU yesterday also met with this and agreed that there should be a ceasefire. Of course, the stance that Israel is posing, especially with what Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, said the other day, which he tried to clarify about the stance of the institution. But essentially, do you see an end, a solution in sight, and perhaps the role that the UN has to play here?
Well, Melissa, there has been countless resolutions, as you rightly pointed out, since the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. And of course, the advent of the Palestinian resistance to an Israeli state. We know that, on one part, West Bank Palestinians, of course, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or Fatah, if you want to call it, had recognized the State of Israel as a result of the Oslo Accord. In the early 90s. But of course, that recognition was rejected by the Hamas movement in the Gaza Strip. So we still are not in a position whereby both sides, talking about, well, maybe triple sides, actually, because of course, one hand, you have the Israelis, on the other hand, you have Hamas, in Gaza Strip, but of course, the Fatah or the Palestinian authorities in the West Bank. There has been no compromise, in terms of, what would be like a lasting solution. And the UN, for itself, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for a ceasefire. But interesting enough, in these kind of circumstances, we see a huge divide between countries like the United States, Germany and France, saying that, they do not want a ceasefire, that what they want is a pause. So there has been some kind of a diplomatic row, as far as the United Nations Security Council is concerned, on what consists of a pause and what consists of a ceasefire. In effect, countries like Russia have said, they want to see a ceasefire. But because the Israeli Defense Forces has promised to annihilate Hamas, the United States has fallen behind them, saying they should limit the level of civilian casualties, which of course it's very difficult to account for. But the big problem now that the UN has is that it is split in the middle, as it has always been, when it comes to the case between Israel and the Palestinians. So there is a challenge for the UN in agreeing, especially the members of the United Nations Security Council, the permanent members, in agreeing a way forward. So this is a challenge that we face at this point in time. The US is split in the middle as to what a ceasefire or a pause, actually means.
Today we're hearing that Gazans are rejecting the expected ground troops, ground invasion that Israel has said will begin. The Gazans are saying that they will fight them. What do you anticipate will happen?
Well, Minister, I think, the Israeli Defense Forces may have, promised to invade using their ground forces, perhaps, aerial forces as well, the Air Force through the sea. But it seems as if, realism has kicked in. This is going to be not just a pronouncement, but, carrying out an invasion into Gaza would be perhaps a death trap. I'm very certain that the Hamas group understands the psychology of the Israeli Defense Forces. They will want to carry out an invasion to perhaps satisfy the cry of the Palestinians, the cry of the Israelis, which is quite genuine in terms of the aftermath of the October 7 invasion. But the reality is that, Gaza is a very complex environment. It will be an urban warfare. And it will be very difficult for the Israeli Defense Forces to achieve their mission. So I think the big problem, which we're experiencing since the promise of an invasion, is that perhaps the Israeli Defense Forces from the military side are asking the politicians, what is going to be the mission? Can we really achieve the mission of rescuing the hostages? Can we achieve the mission of annihilating Hamas? Remember, Hamas is not just people, it's an ideology. And therefore, it will be very challenging for the Israeli Defense Forces to believe that an incursion into Hamas or into Gaza will resolve the crisis. So I think for now, the reason why we're having the pause is because there is really no end in sight, and I think it's a good reason. What we're looking for at this point in time is to see how this crisis can be resolved in a peaceful manner, and let's go back to this two-state, resolution where both sides, both Hamas, of course, work together with the PLO authorities, the Palestinian Liberation Authorities. And then, of course, recognize the state of Israel, just like Israel must recognize the state of Palestine. Without this, we will still be back, sometime in future on this crisis.
Perhaps as a final question, how do you think people should read what's happening here? Is this a war with, Hamas? Is this a religious war in any way, or is this a terrorist situation?
Well, I think this is, a war that, it's about the existence of statehood. Israel wants to exist as a state. At the same time, the Palestinian authorities want to exist as a state. The kind of tactics that both sides have exhibited is nothing short of terror. And one of the key reasons why this crisis has not been resolved, for the past years is that there has always been a huge level of propaganda, misinformation and disinformation warfare, whereby each party, wants to align to a particular ideology. I think for the Israelis, they want to ensure that, the state of Palestine does not exist, because that would be an existential threat to the state of Israel. On the part of the Palestinians, they also want to make sure that, as long as they do not have a state of their own, Israel will continue to be at war with Palestinians. So I think, what we're looking at here is a balance. But, for peace to win, we must be able to come to a point where Israel, will be recognized as a state, as much as Palestine, should be recognized as a sovereign state. If we do not come to that point, which is the crux of the matter, then this crisis or war is going to live forever.
David Otto, a security specialist, many thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Well, we continue with more appeals coming out from the United Nations. The UN agency providing aid to Palestinian civilians in Gaza, they're asking for more fuel to sustain their aid operation. United Nations Relief and Works Agency Commissioner told a news conference in Jerusalem that the humanitarian situation in the Islamist Hamas-ruled enclave has been dire, and shortage of fuel supply has taken a direct toll on their relief operations.
Basic services people in Gaza are dying. They are not only dying from bombs and strike. Soon, many more will die from the consequences of siege imposed on the Gaza Strip. Basic services are crumbling. Medicine is running out. Food and water are running out. The streets of Gaza have started overflowing with sewage. Gaza is on the brink of a massive health hazard as the risk of diseases are looming. I warn that we will not be able to continue our humanitarian operation if we do not get the fuel supply. My warning still stands. Over the last few days, UNRWA has drastically limited its consumption of fuel, but this came at a cost. Our team had to make tough decisions that no humanitarian workers should do. What needs more support? Bakeries, water station, life support machine in a hospital. All this needs fuel to function.
Well, EU leaders are also calling for pauses in Israeli bombings and Hamas rocket attacks to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. In a declaration agreed at the summit in Brussels, the leaders of the Union's 27 nations expressed the gravest concern for the deteriorating humanitarian situation. The The summit was the leaders' first in-person meeting since the deadly October 7th assault on Israel by Palestinian militant group Hamas, which prompted Israel to bombard and blockade Hamas-run Gaza.
Israel is a democracy attacked by Hamas, a terrorist organization. Israel has the right of self-defense in line with international law and international humanitarian law. There was a strong call from the leaders that Hamas must immediately release all hostages without any preconditions. And it was clear that through its terrorist activities, Hamas is also bringing harm to the Palestinian people. Hamas has provoked a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. For the Commission, it's very important that we continue to intensify our efforts to deal with the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The aid needs to reach Gaza unhindered and quickly. And I think it is important that we acknowledge the pain and the suffering of the Israeli people and the families that lost relatives or where relatives are hostages. If we want to speak to Israel and influence Israel. And therefore, it is so important that you first listen if you want to be listened to.
We are staying with the situation in Gaza. The Israeli military said it had killed a senior Hamas commander who helped plan the October 7th attacks. The IDF also said it struck dozens of Hamas targets in the past 24 hours as it conducted targeted raids in the central area of the Gaza Strip. According to Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, Israel has no interest in war with any other foes other than Hamas, and its ground operation in Gaza will come when conditions are right. Israel has carried out weeks of intense bombardment of the densely populated Strip following the attack on Israeli communities. Well, in the face of a ground invasion from Israel, Gazans appear unfazed as they reject the expected offensive. Palestinians in Khan Yunis, southern Gaza, say they will fight Israeli troops if they do invade. Israel says it is preparing a ground invasion, but has been urged by the US and Arab countries to delay an operation that would multiply the number of civilian casualties in the densely populated coastal strip and might ignite a wider conflict. An opinion poll published Friday suggests almost half of Israelis now want to hold off on the ground invasion out of fear for at least the 224 hostages reported to be held there. The US says it has struck 2 facilities in eastern Syria, claiming they were used by Iranian forces and affiliated groups, but stressed the strikes are separate and distinct from the conflict in Gaza, and there had been no coordination with Israel. However, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said this is very bad as US strikes in Syria show broader regional tensions. Mr. Peskov rules out any risk of Russia being drawn into the conflict after US fighter jets Friday struck weapons and ammunition facilities in Syria in retaliation for attacks on US forces by Iranian-backed militia. And the White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby is criticizing a visit to Moscow by a Hamas delegation. The delegation visited Moscow Thursday for talks on the release of foreign hostages, including Russian citizens that the militant group is currently holding in Gaza. Russia has ties to all key players in the Middle East, including Israel, Iran, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas.
Can't speak for their travel habits or with our conversations with the Russians. Our message to any other nation around the world is this is not a time to be supporting Hamas's ability to continue to kill Israelis, and it's certainly not a time or any nation out there that wants to be involved should look for ways to be involved to help Israel defend itself and to help get humanitarian assistance in. So we'll see what comes of the conversation.
In the meantime, the Kremlin is defending its decision to invite a Hamas delegation to Moscow. Russia says it believes it is necessary to maintain contacts with all sides in the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Mr. Peskov said the delegation had met with representatives of Russia's foreign ministry but had no contacts with the Kremlin. Israel urged Russia Thursday to expel the visiting Hamas delegation, calling their invitation to Moscow deplorable. Moscow has repeatedly blamed the current crisis on the failure of U.S. diplomacy and called for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and the resumption of talks aimed at finding a peace settlement. Hamas released its own statements in which it praised the efforts of Russia's president and the foreign ministry to end what it called the crimes of Israel that are supported by the West. And about 900 additional U.S. troops are heading to the Middle East or have newly arrived there to bolster air defenses to protect U.S. personnel amid a surge in attacks in the region by Iran-affiliated groups. Well, this information was released by the Pentagon, adding that U.S. troops have been attacked at least 12 times in Iraq and 4 times in Syria in the past week. The U.S. Central Command says 24 American military personnel were wounded last week in a series of drone attacks at American bases in Iraq and Syria.
Part of our efforts to deter a broader conflict and further bolster U.S. force protection capabilities, I can confirm that since our initial force posture announcement, approximately 900 troops have subsequently deployed or are in the process of deploying to the U.S. Central Command area of responsibility. These include forces that have been on prepare to deploy orders and which are deploying from the continental United States. Deployed and deploying units include a terminal high-altitude area defense battery from Fort Bliss, Texas, Patriot batteries from Fort Sill, Oklahoma, Patriot and Avenger batteries from Fort Liberty, North Carolina, and associated air defense headquarters elements from Fort Bliss and Fort Cavados, Texas. While I won't talk specific deployment locations for these forces, I can confirm that they are not going to Israel and that, again, they are intended to support regional deterrence efforts and further bolster U.S. force protection capabilities.
And at least 27 people have died after Hurricane Otis, one of the most powerful storms ever hit Mexico, hammered the beach resort of Acapulco, causing damage running into billions of dollars. The government said the Category 5 storm flooded streets, ripped roofs off homes and hotels, submerged cars and cut communications, road and air access, leaving a trail of wreckage across Acapulco, a city of nearly 900,000. 4 people are still missing. Of those who survived, it's been a harrowing experience. Andrea Maria Vaduv said she felt more scared when she realized the scale of the disaster. She took shelter in her bedroom initially, but had to go to the bathroom until the storm waned and could reunite with her other friends until it dissipated.
After a couple of minutes of shaking the door, I was able to open it. I walk into the hallway, I go to the living room, and I literally see the couch going out the window. And I was in shock, and I was barefooted. There was glass everywhere. The wind was so powerful, so intense, and I realized that this is a real hurricane. And I was in the room for about an hour thinking that I would be safe in that room, and then I realized that I wasn't going to be safe in there, and I went into the bathroom, and that was the safest place. And that's when I heard the windows breaking, and I could already hear in my room. My instinct was to obviously protect myself, and I was very worried about my friends, and very worried about my family not being able to reach me. Those were my thoughts. But for some reason, maybe in the eye of the storm, right, quote unquote, you only have hope, and that's what I felt. To be honest, I was never afraid. Today, I'm more afraid than yesterday and when it happened, because I'm now coming down from that adrenaline, and I'm realizing the danger we were in.
Well, residents of a small port town near Italy are gripped with fear of a swarm of earthquakes that was sparked by a so-called supervolcano. Campi Flegrei is a unique volcano that resembles a bowl-shaped crater rather than a towering mountain. It is home to over 360,000 people residing around its unsubmerged crater, with an additional 2.3 million people living in close proximity. In the past month alone, the region has been rattled by over 1,000 earthquakes. The government says it is planning for a possible mass evacuation of tens of thousands of people who live around the vast volcanic area known as the Campi Flegrei, or Phlegraean fields, from the ancient Greek word for burning. And EU leaders are discussing an ongoing support for Ukraine amidst its war with Russia. The European Union broadly favours a plan to support Ukraine with 50 billion euros over the next 4 years, but it will take until December for the 27-nation bloc to agree on the details. The European Commission proposed in June 50 billion euros for Ukraine from 2024 to 2027 as part of a revision of the EU's budget, which EU governments hope to agree on by December. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban says he wants the proposal for the fund to be better justified before he could agree to it, and his Slovak counterpart Robert Fico cited corruption in Ukraine in expressing his reservations, but neither rejected the proposal outright.
If we don't help Ukraine, then what is the alternative? Really, I mean, Russia wins, and so what happens next? Why do you think that you're safe then when we give away Ukraine and don't support them right now? So that is a question that is actually unanswered by them. So I think we have to, talk further.
I expect we will disagree on this matter. We have a very strong view that Ukraine has a right to defend its sovereignty, its independence, its democracy. It's by no means a perfect country, and there are and have been issues and problems around corruption, for example. But this is a war of aggression. Russia has invaded, an unprovoked invasion, is trying to take over all or part of that country. If we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, he won't stop there. So it is a threat to all of us.
Students are returning to universities in Germany this week, but with the start of the new academic year, tens of thousands of students struggle to find a place to live. The housing crisis gripping Germany has developed over the past decade, and now it hits international students. Soaring costs coupled with higher interest rates have led to a surge in developer insolvencies in Germany. Data from Germany's Institute for Economic Research shows that in the first 7 months of this year, a total of 319 German real estate companies declared bankruptcy, a year-on-year increase of 56%. Let's bring in Deutsche Welle correspondent Mathis Richmond, who has more on this. Hi, Mathis. Let's start with the international students. Why are they so badly affected?
So Germany has a huge shortage in workers, and especially skilled workers. The government has been on a spree trying to woo internationals to come to Germany, study here and support the workforce. And for many from outside of Germany, the country is attractive because higher education here is pretty much for free. The catch is that the German rental market often relies on financial guarantees, which are really tough to come by for internationals. And speaking for the city of Berlin, where I am right now, many flats change hands just through connections. And if you've just arrived here from another country, you just don't have those.
So, Martis, is the housing crisis in Germany a problem only for students, or is, this a wider issue?
No, this is certainly a wider issue. The number of students in Germany has increased by about 1 million over the past decade, and many people have been moving to the cities, just as it is around the world. But there has been a failure to invest in social housing and infrastructure. Student representatives say they fear soon the amount of money in your bank account will decide where you go to study, not your wits. The thing is that next to missing investment in housing, refugees and migrants are moving to Germany, and they also rather live in the urban centers. So there are actually flats available in the countryside, but not in the city. And this is where universities and businesses are. This is aggravated by the fact that Germany, unlike other European countries, is a nation of tenants. While across Europe, around 70% of the population own the place they live in Germany, only 46% do so. And again, in major cities, the percentage is even lower. All in all, studies have revealed that Germany lacks more than 700,000 apartments, especially in the affordable segment.
But are authorities aware of this problem, and what practically are they doing?
The government announced a federal subsidy this year as part of a scheme to provide more affordable accommodation for students. And more broadly, when it comes to the housing crisis, the government has said it wanted 400,000 new homes built per year. But this has proven to be a challenge, with construction costs increasing and a shortage of skilled workers and building materials. In 2022, this meant the government was not able to fulfill its goal. It built just under 300,000 units. And add to this that new buildings have to meet stricter climate standards, a big discussion here in Germany, and you have an idea of how big of a challenge all of this is.
Welcome back. We are in the United States, where armored trucks, K9 units have joined the manhunt in Maine for a U.S. Army reservist wanted in connection with Wednesday's mass shootings. The attacker killed 18 people, wounded other 13 at a bowling alley and a bar in Lewiston. The town, a formerly textile hub of 38,000 people, and neighboring communities largely shut down to enable hundreds of officers expand their manhunt. Authorities have also searched the woods, waterways and towns. Police have issued an arrest warrant for Robert R. Card, a 40-year-old sergeant at a nearby U.S. Army Reserve base. Law enforcement officials said he had been temporarily committed to a mental health facility over the summer. And we're still learning more about the character of the gunman, Robert Card. His neighbor says Mr. Card was a gun enthusiast who otherwise kept a low profile. The last time he saw Card, he was helping his father cut hay on their farm, looking perfectly normal.
The last time I saw him was 2 weeks ago when he was helping his father hay this field right here. And perfectly normal. I mean, there was nothing out of the norm. Hardworking farming family, doing their thing, nothing out of the ordinary. It's not just my hometown, it's my neighbor. You know what I mean? It's crazy. I have a neighbor that did something really horrible. So it's I don't know, it's definitely gonna take a long time to get through this, I guess. It won't be the same. Nothing's gonna be the same. I feel so bad for his father, what he's gonna go through, the rest of his family. It's not their fault, but it's gonna fall on them. There's no getting around it. It's gonna fall on them. It was a $2,000 thermal scope he had just gotten. And that's infrared. You can see in the dark with it. It picks up heat signatures. I don't have that. I mean, who could afford that if unless you're really into wanting that?
Away from the United States, India says it is exploring all legal options after a court in Qatar sentenced 8 former Indian naval officers to death on unspecified charges. Reports say the men who worked with a private company in Qatar were arrested last year on suspicion of spying. Neither Qatar nor India have revealed the specific charges against them. Thursday, the Indian government said it was deeply shocked and would take up the verdict with Qatari authorities. Experts say the recent diplomatic tensions could impact relations between the two countries. Millions of Indians live in the Gulf, with tens of thousands of them working in semi-skilled and unskilled low-income jobs. Well, we're here in Africa. Most parts of Ghana have been plunged into darkness since Thursday evening. And this is due to a lack of gas to power machinery used to generate electricity in the country. Power distribution firm Ghana Grid Company Limited put the supply deficit at 550 megawatts at peak time at Tema Power Plant near the capital, Accra. The power situation which could worsen in the coming years, has been exacerbated by the country's financial distress. That's according to the study by the Center for Socioeconomic Studies. Ghana gets much of its electricity from mostly poorly maintained hydro and thermal sources. The South African Police Service, SAPS, recently destroyed drugs valued at 800 million rands in Johannesburg. This is the third drug destruction process in this financial year, and the most recent destruction was in Cape Town in September, where 1.7 tons to the value of 170 million rands were destroyed. SAPS reported that in the 2020-2023 fiscal year, 20.8 tons of drugs with a street value of 20 billion rands were destroyed in the 2022-2023 financial year. Still staying with South Africa, its Deputy President Paul Mashati is expressing his confidence in the Springboks securing victory in the upcoming 2023 Rugby World Cup final. Mr. Mashati conveyed this sentiment while responding to questions on the National Council of Provinces on Thursday, underlining the nation's steadfast support for the team.
Well, thank you, Honorable Speaker. I will be watching rugby on Saturday, and I'll be supporting the Bokke. You know, when the Bokke goes into a match, they go in to win. So I'm looking forward to that win. In fact, the president is leaving tomorrow to go and cheer them up. So we need a good score, but anything in rugby, if you are 1 point ahead, it's fine. If it's 11-10, it's fine. If it's a good margin, we are even more happy.
All the best to them. A former Chinese Premier Li Keqiang has died at the age of 68 of a sudden heart attack. Once a top contender for Communist Party leadership, he was seen to have been sidelined by President Xi Jinping. Mr. Li retired in March following a decade in office, during which his influence on economic reform significantly dimmed. His vision for economic reform, often called Leaconomics, faced challenges as Xi favored more state control. His death is being widely mourned on Chinese social media, with many expressing shock and grief, some saying it signals the end of an era. Wen T-Song is a political scientist at the Australian National University. He describes China's Li as a down-to-earth premier with eyes for little guys.
during Li Keqiang's time as premier, he primarily came across as the economic moderate who, after having served in some of the more economically middling or challenged provinces, people like Liaoning and Henan, for example, he has this concern for the average man, if you will, or that he's always seemed to be having concern for the economic blue collars in mind as he go about economic policy making. And that is why also I think in terms of policy making, he tends to be, generally speaking, more of an advocate for downward redistribution policy. He also tends to be interested in creating more space for the grassroots to pursue economic opportunities.
And finally on the program, over 300 corgis and their owners roamed and played at the Halloween Corgis party held in Beijing. The dogs featured and participated in the games, with owners buying food for their pets at the fair at the resort Tou, Beijing's rural Daxing district. The party organizers say the event is mainly to teach everyone the knowledge of civilized dog raising, including the need for a leash when going out, shoveling crap in time, and also to allow all dog lovers communicate. Corgis have reportedly gained popularity over the last few years, with thousands of the short-legged dogs adopted every year worldwide. In 2019, the American Kennel Club declared this breed as the most popular in the US. And the United Kingdom, the number of corgis adopted peaked in 2021. And that's according to data from the club, following the breed's portrayal as Queen Elizabeth's favorite. And that's our show this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.